Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. It's that time of year when Topiary Nigel needs his annual trim. He's made out of yew, but any evergreen plant is really best trimmed the end of August and in September, because that way they stay crisp throughout winter. And throughout summer, Nigel sort of almost melds into all the growth around him. But when you come to winter and all this has died back, Topiary Nigel stands out. We want him looking proud and crisp and green all winter long. Don't you, Nige? Well, sort of. On today's programme, we meet a couple whose passion for gardening has become an inspiration for art. Carol is looking at the fascinating depths of blue that you can add to your borders. And I shall be showing you how to take cuttings now so that you have lots of new plants for free to put in the garden next spring. Right, where are you? Can I have the basket, please? Thank you very much. Good girl. By this stage of the year, the propagating greenhouse hasn't got a lot of propagation going on, but by far the most important role it's playing is providing as much heat as possible for those fruits that need blazing sunshine. And of course, the first are chilies. I like growing chilies. There's something about them that is very rewarding. Now, we've got a range of them here, and they are ripening well. And I have been harvesting them, but when you're harvesting them, it's really important to go for them when they're fully ripe. You can see this one here, which is a Hungarian hot wax. That is pretty much ripe, so I could harvest it. That one has still got some orange in it, and this is still distinctly orange. And what you want to look for is full saturation of its intended colour. So if it's a red one, it wants to be fully red. I'm going to take that off, and that's good. Now, if you harvest them when they're ripe, the unripe ones will ripen quicker and the flowers will produce more fruit. So you can keep them going, whereas if you leave them on, however decorative they are, you're slowing down production. And I should keep them producing lovely fresh chilies well into autumn, even up until Christmas. That certainly isn't going to happen with the aubergines. So this is a variety called Black Pearl. They're growing in pots, which I find is much better for production because although you get smaller plants, they're slightly stressed, so they make more flowers and more fruit. We've already harvested and eaten half a dozen good-sized ones like this so far this summer. At this stage of the year, it is important to keep nice compact plants. So where you've got a leader like that, that could be taken off because we don't want any more flowers at this time of year. We simply want to put the energy into converting the flowers that exist into fruits that will ripen before the weather gets cooler and the light goes. I water these twice a day. If it's hot, certainly give them a good soak once a day because they've exhausted all the stores of water and of nutrients. I feed these twice a week with a high potash feed. A tomato feed is perfect, or liquid seaweed. A fruit that is nowhere near ready, that is still really hard and heavy like a cannonball, are the melons. This is a variety called Sivan, and it's coming along fine. But I know from experience, it's one thing to grow a melon. The hard bit is to grow a melon that ripens perfectly and has that delicious sweetness. That should get about 30% bigger. I'm not going to get a huge melon from this. Melons are designed to grow flat on the ground, so they do need some support because there's a real risk that that will fall off. The best thing to do is to use a little bit of old netting or a pair of tights or whatever you've got and support it. So take the weight, wrap it round like that. And this is very Heath Robinson, but it does work. And then I'm just going to put that round the top so it can't come off, and the weight is being taken by the netting. So that should be ready to eat in about 3 weeks' time. This is a new variety on me, so I will report back on the most important thing of all, which is how it tastes. Now, although we cover a wide range of horticultural flowers and fruits and plants of every kind here at Longmeadow, I know that the secret of success in any garden is how it makes you feel. If you think your garden is beautiful, if it makes you happy, then it's a good garden. That's all that matters. It's always private and personal. And we went down to Wiltshire to visit a garden whose owners, I think it's fair to say, are deeply in love with their garden.
I would say, out of the two of us, 100% categorically, I am the gardener.
I do take
And Neil's
part.
my sous chef. I'm Jonathan,
And I'm Neil.
and we live in North Wiltshire with our beautiful 14-year-old Cocker Spaniel, Zaki.
And he loves the garden. I do have an input. I love picking the flowers and dressing our cottage, really, but I don't
You just
really
don't
like...
do the manual work.
I don't like the
He
digging.
doesn't like getting his nails dirty. I love everything about my garden, and what I like especially is the fact that it's all our own creation. We moved here, and when we did, it was a total blank canvas.
And then we put our creativity to it, and this is what came.
I love herbaceous perennials, and I like the natural look. I don't like formality and uniform. It's been so easy to divide or take seeds or take cuttings and move them around the garden. Canterbury bells, they started off as just one tiny little plant, and they're interspersed throughout the garden. And this is a lovely plant. It's a midsummer flowering clematis, which goes on and on and on and on. I only put this in a couple of years ago. We also like to add a rose every year. This one's called Summer Wine, and it's now 9 years old, and it was bought for my 50th by my neighbour.
It's just wild and beautiful.
This is my favourite bed. Got Sweet William, which are all grown from previous year's seeds. Foxgloves, also grown from previous year's seeds. Look at the bees in it, look at the insects in it, look at the colour and the vibrancy. I just love this bed. People say, why have you got so many benches? Because I just like to sit and admire my work sometimes, like today. The watering is Neil's responsibility.
Thank you, Jonathan.
10 out of 10 for watering, nothing else.
I absolutely am so inspired by the garden. I started to dance in 1969, and in 1993 I retired and woke up one morning and had this sudden urge to go out and buy some paintbrushes and started to dance with paint. And I found that when I started to paint, I got a real buzz out of creating movement and flow. So I spend a lot of my time just watching the flowers evolve. So we've got a daisy, a photograph of a poppy, and a rose. And what I'm doing is using all the different shapes, textures and colours from all those flowers, like to paint what I feel, not necessarily what I see. It does come from Jonathan's fantastic green fingers.
I can come into the garden in the morning and the next minute I could be looking at my watch and it's 6 hours later. I could just lose myself. The whole world is all forgotten about.
We love it, don't we, here?
Absolutely love it, yeah. Couldn't think of anywhere else we'd prefer to be.
We trimmed off all the long grass and the flowers from the bank of the mound the other day. And the idea is to strip it right back to exposed soil, and then the seeds from the flowers can germinate, and it should get better and better. But what it also does is expose these holes you see on the bank. And if you find, when you cut long grass, round holes about an inch in diameter, they almost invariably belong to voles. Voles love long grass. In fact, if you sit quietly, sometimes you can see a head pop out a little bit warily, and they are really important prey for raptors like owls. So it's not just insects and butterflies that benefit from having some meadow grass. The whole food chain, including mammals, are an important beneficiary, and you can add to that with just a small patch in your back garden. The lavender hedge here on the mound has finished flowering. And I'm very proud of this hedge, not because it's particularly special as lavender goes, but because it's there at all and has been there now for 3 years. Lavender at Longmeadow doesn't grow well. We've lost dozens of plants, and it's always in the winter because it's the combination of wet and cold is what they absolutely hate, and they just rot and die. And in fact, I've brought this along. This is French lavender, Lavandula stoicus, which is beautiful, and I've tried growing it outside, and this absolutely doesn't survive our winters. As far as I'm concerned here, it's tender. I do occasionally grow it in pots and then bring it into the greenhouse, but outside I've stuck with angustifolia. I planted it with lots of grit, and it's come through, and it's come through well. But it's finished flowering, and now it's time to cut it back. But you should never cut back into old wood. However leggy it is, always cut back with a little stub of new growth. However, if you look down into the plant, sometimes you'll see new shoots springing up from the base. And that means you can take it right down. As long as the new shoots are already there, they will grow, especially with the extra light you put in, and you'll regenerate the plant. So I'm just cutting above the green growth. Of course, this is precious stuff because the fragrance is great for putting in a pillow to help you sleep. And my granny always just stitched them up in a muslin bag, put them in her clothes drawers so that the clothes smelt fresh and sweet, and also it kept the moths away. Cutting back lavender is one of those things that you need to take stock depending where you live. But for most of us, the best time to do it is immediately after flowering. I like the way that it's almost flowing like liquid over the edge of the brickwork. And it's working well with the new planting that we have here. And the colour theme of pale yellows touched with blues, a little bit of white, is working out. And whilst the yellows are relatively easy because there are a lot of plants within that pale, lemony yellow range, blue is much more difficult. In fact, it is by far and away the rarest colour in nature. But that hasn't put Carol off, because she's been down to the garden house in Devon to celebrate blue in all its many forms.
Who doesn't love blue? It's a magical colour. You can mix it with soft pastels to create lovely romantic pictures. Or you can use it as a foil for brilliant colours, oranges and reds, and make them look even zingier than they are. But what I love about it is that whenever it's in the picture, it transforms it into something brilliant and exuberant. Although blue is just one word, it describes all sorts of different hues. Just take this as an example. You've got this almost sort of ink stain of aconite, and next to it, in complete contrast, you've got Campanula lactiflora, the milky bellflower. And the very fact that the plants have got totally different habits also adds to that contrast. The aconite is upright, stiff, definite. The campanula is soft, it sways around backwards and forwards, and it's this that creates the drama. This is the way I love it, in these great sort of flowing streams with this dark aconite rising from the centre. Eryngiums have to be one of the most popular and the most fashionable blue-flowered plants, especially for this time of year. Here, Eryngium Big Blue is combined with this Persicaria and Plexicornis. It's a particularly unusual form of this, with these dark red, dumpy little flowers. Now, eryngiums are such splendid plants, but when this eryngium started to flower, you wouldn't have had this kind of contrast because it would have been silver. But gradually they become imbued with this bright blue colour. And it coincides exactly with the moment at which pollen and nectar become available to bees. The great majority of these European eryngiums are evergreen too, and they look wonderful in the winter when the flowers have faded away and fizzled. There's an enormous range of blue-flowered plants, but one of the most popular ones is the geranium. There are scores of blue geraniums, but probably the best of the lot is this one. It's Roseanne. Because it's a sterile hybrid, it has no reason to stop flowering and will flower non-stop from May right the way through till October. Without the blue in this picture, the agapanthus and the eryngium, this plant association would be pleasant enough. It'd be lovely. But putting that blue in there really takes it to a different level. That's what makes these pinks pinker, makes all this lovely biscuity colour really stand out. I love the way it's combined with the pink fluffy heads of the Sanguisobra obtusa. And then all the self-seeded plants in here, wild carrot, white and pink. It just brings your eye into the centre of this picture and makes you appreciate everything all the more, whether it's the Stipa gigantea or this lovely soft grass, Chianocloa. It really completes the picture. Whether it's the soft, misty blue of forget-me-nots or the bright, startling blue of delphiniums, the more gardens I visit, the more convinced I am of just how important blue is. Without it, our gardens would lack sparkle. What it adds is this wonderful exuberance and brings the whole garden to life.
Blue is a completely fascinating colour because it's so elusive. So when you do find it, obviously you want to hang on to it. But on inspection, what we think of as blue very often isn't. Take the delphinium, which is blue, actually is touched with an awful lot of pink. There are very, very few flowers, perhaps Meconopsis, that are true, unarguable blue. Blue is really hard to find, which of course is why it's so precious in the garden. I know there are some things in gardening that are particularly scary, particularly if you're not very experienced. I know pruning roses can cause a lot of anxiety, and also taking cuttings. People somehow feel that cuttings is an advanced level of horticulture, and it isn't. A cutting is a really simple way of producing new plants. So, for example, this lace-cap hydrangea, it's lovely. and I'd like to have some more running down along the back of the orchard bed here. And if I take cuttings, I can guarantee that the new plants will look exactly the same. So a cutting is the best way to do it, rather than buying another plant. Now, what you look for with a cutting is a nice, straight, strong growth that doesn't have a flower or a bud attached. So, for example, here we've got a nice, straight, strong growth, but there's a flower waiting to open out. So that won't make a good cutting. Whereas this next to it would. And you cut it just below a leaf node where leaves attach to the stem. Cut that off. What I've got are 2 leaves coming off it, 2 leaves more, and that is cutting material. Now, in my pocket, I have a polythene bag, and this is really important because the quickest way it's going to die is by losing moisture. So putting it in a bag just stops that process. So I'm just going to take a few more. One more there. Now, I just want to take one more type of cutting from another plant in the dual garden, and then we'll go and pot these up. Here, I've got a salvia. Salvia amistad. It flowers all summer long with these lovely, intense purple petals with these deep, dark, almost black bracts. I'd love to have some more of it, and the easiest way would be to take cuttings now. And there's a particular type of growth that is so good for taking cuttings that is really evident now. If you see, there's this main stem there, a leaf, and then in between the leaf and the stem is this side shoot, and that will make perfect cutting material. So if I carefully cut that out, and I want to take a couple more. There's another beauty there. And that looks like being a goodie too. Okay, those 4 will do. Now, having taken the cuttings, it is important to get on with this because the quicker I can get these into pots, into a medium, the more likely they are to strike. I'm going to start with the salvia. I'm going to reduce this down to just below the leaf node, there like that, and then take off these bottom leaves, like that. The reason why you take the leaves off is because obviously the plant loses moisture through its leaves. So the fewer leaves it has, then the less likely it is to dry out. And the only reason you don't take them all off is because obviously it feeds the roots through the leaves. So as the roots grow, it needs some leaves to give it a little bit of life. You can see there I've cut just under the leaf node, and the roots will form from that. And once we get roots forming, new leaves will grow, and it will become a new healthy plant. And increasingly, I'm taking semi-right cuttings in perlite because they root really well. But they should be just as successful in a gritty compost mix. Right, let's just get the rest of these in. I will label that Salvia amistad. I will water the perlite, but just by misting it once, twice, or even 3 times a day, that will keep the leaves moist, it will stop them drying out, and that can make the difference between life and death. With the hydrangea, I'm going to use the compost mixed 50-50 with horticultural grit. And what we're after from both of them is drainage. Now you can see, even though they've been in a bag and it's just been a few minutes, they're not happy at all, so we need to be quick. That comes off, that comes off. And that, and that. But we'll pop that one in there. There we go. And with any cutting, it's a very simple race between the top part dying and the bottom part producing roots. And if the bottom part wins, then you get a new plant. Pop that one in there. Actually, got too much leaf on that. I'm going to reduce that down. There we go. As hydrangea leaves are larger, cutting them in half will help reduce further water loss. I'm now going to put these into the greenhouse, but out of the full glare of the sun. And not let the compost dry out. And I would expect them to root in between 2 and 4 weeks' time. We'll see new growth on the top, and then they can be potted on, and I'll do that with you. So if you haven't taken cuttings before, now is the time. Give it a go. And if you're an old hand and you've been taking cuttings for years, well, here are some other jobs for you to do this weekend. It's important to water azaleas, rhododendrons and camellias now. They're forming their buds for next spring, and if these are dry at the end of summer or early autumn, they often fall off in spring before they open. So give them a good weekly soak for the next 6 to 8 weeks. If you have a pond, you'll find that blanket weed can spread very quickly at this time of year. Carefully scoop it from the surface and then place it by the edge of the water. Leave it for 24 hours so any creature, great or small, can make their way back into the water, and then you can add it to your compost heap. Up, lie down, good girl. If you grow shallots, onions or garlic, and they're fully dried, they should be prepared for storage for winter. I trim off the stems, remove any loose skin and tidy the roots. And then find if they're put in a basket in a cool, dry place, they will store well right into next spring. This is a cross between a dahlia and a chocolate cosmos. It's called Mexican black. It behaves exactly as most dahlias do, and it's an absolutely fabulous plant. In order to keep dahlias flowering constantly into autumn, one thing you have to do is keep deadheading them. Otherwise, they're going to set seed and then they won't flower. But I know that some people get confused between what is a bud and what is a spent flower. A bud is always rounded and plump and reasonably flat-topped. But a spent flower is always pointed and a cone. You always deadhead right down to the base of the stem. Like that, and here's one that's closing up. So don't just cut the head off, but go right down there, and that will stimulate fresh growth. I'm afraid that's it from us today. I'll be back here at Longmeadow at the same time next week. So until then, bye-bye.